So what I want to do here is have a discussion about Totally Awesome Hulk. And what I'm hoping is that at the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of how he fits into the all-new, all-different Marvel landscape, as well as why Amadeus Cho was selected to pick up the mantle from where Bruce Banner left off. So Amadeus Cho first appeared in Amazing Fantasy Volume 2, issue number 15 in 2006, and was created by writer Greg Pak alongside artist Takeshi Miyazawa. But as we get into this, I want to jump back for a second and have a discussion about both Greg Pak and the Amazing Fantasy line of stories, since both of these will be instrumental in evolving Cho into the newest version of the Hulk. Originally existing as a leftover relic of the science fiction era of comics and functioning as an anthology series focusing on short 5 to 6 page stories dealing with monsters and beasts, the original Amazing Adult Fantasy line of stories saw contributions from artists Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and Don Heck, all of whom provided their own bits of influence in carving out their respective niches within the comic industry. While the first 14 issues would retain the Amazing Adult Fantasy name, with issue number 15, the title was rebranded to Amazing Fantasy and saw the introduction of Spider-Man. Going on to achieve his own solo series 7 months later due to his popularity, because the Fantastic Four had been introduced in November of 1961 and it paved the way for Marvel to transition to stories based on superheroes, with issue number 15, the Amazing Fantasy line was closed down, allowing Marvel to begin focusing almost exclusively on superhero-themed stories. Now, where Marvel Premiere and Marvel Preview would be launched in 1972 and 1975 respectively, as anthology series almost identical to Amazing Fantasy, but focusing on more realistic heroes and introduce characters like Star-Lord and Rocket Raccoon. While I don't have a concrete reason for this, after having a conversation with Sal at Comic Pop, the general consensus between the two of us was that with Editor-in-Chief Joe Quesada looking to return Marvel to what he considered to be its former glory, by reducing the number of mutants, retconning Peter's marriage to Mary Jane, and disbanding the Avengers, the Amazing Fantasy series was brought back as a nostalgia trip of sorts. Using the first 14 issues to introduce heroes like Aranya Corazon, who would go on to undertake the mantle of Spider-Girl, as well as a female version of Scorpion and Vampire by Night, because the original Amazing Fantasy was an anthology series, issue number 15 of the second volume looked to introduce newer characters who would go on to become as popular as Spider-Man. While some of these characters included The Great Video by Daniel Way, Blackjack by Dan Slott, and Monstro by Robert Kirkman, the introduction of Amadeus Cho came under the guise of a character named Mastermind Excello by Greg Pak. In his first appearance, the 7-page story of Amadeus Cho didn't actually reveal much about his personal life. Instead, because issue number 15 was more of a preview of the character with his further expansions based on his popularity, all Pak really established here was that an unknown enemy had blown up the house of Amadeus Cho and his family, killing his parents in the process, and that he was being pursued by both the unknown group as well as authorities, both of whom had looked to capture him for their own ends. In addition to this, Pak established that Amadeus Cho had been declared the 7th smartest person on the planet, and where this was initially left ambiguous, the discovery of this fact was expanded on with the reveal of Amadeus having won a contest called the Mastermind Excello, which had been hosted by the Excello Soap Company. Now again, because this story was more of a preview, Pak leaves a lot of information unanswered here. But the intriguing element of his character came in that while eating at a diner and unaware that the restaurant also contained Bruce Banner, with the local television news station broadcasting a story of Cho following the bombing of his house, Cho uses a portable scrambling device to block the television signal, something that Banner had noticed but chose not to speak on. However, when the waitress came to Cho to take his order but discovered that he had rescued a baby coyote after his mother had been run over, she drew the attention of one of the local police officers who attempted to force Cho to hand the puppy over in response to a previous rabies pandemic. Now at this moment, Pak gave us a glimpse into what Cho is capable of, but the way in which it was displayed left many of the story's readers confused as to what exactly was going on. On its face, the indication was that Cho had some kind of ability relating to magic or mind control, but in truth, Cho possesses a mind that allows him to calculate an almost unlimited number of possibilities in any given situation. With regards to this scenario, and the time it took for him to reactivate the television and turn the volume all the way up, He had figured out that his best method of escape was to shoot the cop with a lemon seed, splash both the cop and the waitress with pepper, and kick over the pie shelf, leaving them half blind and covered in food. Continuing to demonstrate the abilities of Cho, with the unknown enemies continuing to pursue him as well as the officer, the waitress, and Banner following him outside, when one of the enemy's helicopters approached after monitoring one of the police frequencies after firing a missile aimed at Cho in an effort to kill him, Amadeus uses the rear window mirror to deflect the laser tracking, sending the missile off towards Banner, who transforms into the Hulk and survives the encounter. Now, this bit of the story is extremely important to the future of Amadeus Cho, and that both he and Banner will become extremely intertwined, not in the sense of being friends, but in the sense that Cho himself will view Banner as more of a friend. The encounter between the two is short-lived, and that Hulk makes the case that both himself and Cho are inherently stronger in both character and conviction, leading to him taking off and leaving Cho behind. Now for Greg Pak, his creation of Amadeus Cho was not accidental. During a conversation I'd had with Greg Pak at 2015's Los Angeles Kamikaze-Con, he had stated that the creation of Cho actually came out of his personal desire for more Korean American representation in comics. Historically, while Black Panther, Storm, Sam Wilson, Luke Cage, and Adam Brashear had provided a level of relatability for Black readers, and Jubilee, Sunfire, Zorn, and others had created a level of relatability for Japanese and Chinese readers, Pak had found that the industry actually seemed to be rather thin in terms of representation. While I wouldn't go as far as to say this demographic was being outright ignored by Marvel, I will say that the indication for Pak was that as both someone who had been reading comics all his life, as well as a writer who himself was Korean American, the concept of using Amazing Fantasy as a chance to introduce a new hero of Korean American descent was extremely alluring. However, the issue that Pak had faced was that with Amadeus Cho having no powers and no real connection to the mainstream Marvel universe, his work was cut out for him, and that he had to find a way to make Cho intriguing, but also bring in prospective readers who were apprehensive about buying into the hype. To this end, and as part of the Planet Hulk event, Amadeus Cho began to make limited and sporadic appearances in the main Marvel continuity as a way for Pak to slowly introduce his character to readers and test the waters with various expansions. With Planet Hulk, Cho's character was only brought in by name and referenced by Hulk, who he referred to as a friend. Following this, and going into the Civil War Battle Damage Report, Greg Pak established that the intelligence of Cho made him one of the top 10 smartest people on the planet. Now, this is extremely important for the development of Cho, and the reason why was because this separated him from the rest of Marvel's lineup, but also made him the same. What I mean here is that the smartest characters of Marvel Comics come in the form of Reed Richards, his daughter Valeria, and Dr. Doom, all switching between the #1 spot, followed by any combination of Black Panther, Adam Brashear, Tony Stark, Beast, Hank Pym, and Spider-Man, but all these heroes share the common trait of having some kind of power. Where Tony Stark is the most human of them all, and that his power stems from the knowledge that he put to use in developing the Iron Man armors, Greg Pak throwing Amadeus Cho into this list of characters without powers made him somewhat of a free radical. As a result, even if interest didn't exist among most of Marvel's fan base at the time, enough interest existed that some eyebrows were being raised at the idea of what could be done with the character of Cho. Using this to his advantage, the most significant role of Amadeus Cho in Marvel Comics prior to the launch of Totally Awesome Hulk came with the Incredible Hercules. Written by Greg Pak and drawn by Fred Van Lint, the idea for the Incredible Hercules came out of Greg Pak intending to launch a follow-up series to World War Hulk titled The Renegades, which focused on the various characters who had sided with Banner during the World War Hulk event and how their lives had unfolded in their attempts to escape S.H.I.E.L.D. However, for editors Mark Paniccia and Nate Crosby, the idea of team books was packed and that the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, New Avengers, and the various X-Men, X-Force, and X-Factor related titles were still being published. Looking to deviate away from the large team book and focus on smaller numbers, Greg Pak was paired with Fred Van Lint for the idea of creating a more lighthearted Odd Couple series by bringing Amadeus Cho and Hercules together. Taking place over 6 story arcs, the pairing of Amadeus Cho and Hercules took Marvel by storm, and that where Hercules was brave, strong, and powerful, Amadeus was the brains of the operation. As a result, the snarkiness between the two, coupled with their attempts to stay under S.H.I.E.L.D's radar and avoid the capture of Ares, the Greek god of war, created a natural source of comedy and action, which in turn gave readers a reprieve for the darker stories largely found in the post-Civil War era leading into the events of Dark Reign and Siege. Now, where the Incredible Hercules ended after around 30 issues with Hulk returning to the title, the character of Amadeus largely returned back to the realm of obscurity, making background appearances in Marvel as part of Fear itself and Savage Land. While this did serve to help keep him fresh in the minds of fans who knew of his character, the issue faced by new fans who were jumping into Marvel during the events of Time Runs Out in preparation for the launch of Secret Wars was that they did not know why it was that Amadeus was being featured in these stories. Looking to solve this problem by setting the stage for Cho becoming the Incredible Hulk, when the Secret Wars event officially launched, Greg Pak organized a prelude to the Planet Hulk Secret Wars tie-in, which provided a backstory explaining how it was that reality saw the Earth filled with different versions of the Incredible Hulk. Picking up in Phoenix, Arizona amidst an alternate reality, unlike the main Marvel timeline, at some point, society on this reality's Earth had experienced an unprecedented era of technological advancement due to Banner having never become the Hulk, and the world's top minds using their knowledge to advance society itself. Where Amadeus largely remained the same as his main Marvel counterpart in that he was headstrong, highly intelligent, and a little arrogant, the concept of gamma radiation's existence came when he began using it to genetically engineer pigs for the purpose of beefing up their size and making better bacon. Now, before the lecture of Banner was able to continue any further, S.H.I.E.L.D. director Nick Fury had informed Bruce that this reality's version of Advanced Idea Mechanics, a terrorist organization looking to conquer the world through technological means, had launched a series of nuclear attacks against the Earth's major cities with the intention of sparking complete and total nuclear war. Seeking to keep this from happening, Amadeus and several other members of Banner Industries had taken to intercepting the missiles with the hopes of disarming them before their arrival. However, because the rockets were traveling at Mach 19, which equates to around 15,000 miles per hour, the time necessary to disable the missiles was unavailable. Looking instead to keep the population alive, Amadeus had veered the rockets into the Banner Industries tower, setting off an explosion that killed Amadeus in the process, but spread gamma radiation throughout the world, transforming the entire planet's inhabitants into Hulks. Now, regarding the Totally Awesome Hulk comic book line, in a September 2015 interview with ComicBind.com prior to the series launch, writer Greg Pak had stated that when Marvel was fleshing out the decision to launch Secret Wars, because the event was designed to provide a fresh start for fans who were looking to get into the Marvel Universe, the idea was to remove Bruce Banner as a title character and pass the mantle on to someone new. Keeping the name secret in the months leading up to the title's launch, during this time, editor Mark Paniccia had reaffirmed the idea of Amadeus Cho taking over the title role due to his intertwining history with Bruce Banner. The issue here, however, is that because the start of the Marvel Prime universe picks up 8 months after the end of Secret Wars, with no indication of what had happened during this time, the story of Totally Awesome Hulk did not originally offer any information on how Amadeus Cho became the Hulk or what had happened to Bruce Banner. That said, the reason why I waited so long to produce this video was that with issue number 4 released in March of 2016, this issue finally provided a backstory to the events leading up to the start of Totally Awesome Hulk. What Pak tells us is that 4 months prior to the start of issue number 1, Bruce Banner had responded to a request for aid from Iron Man and Black Panther in stopping a nuclear meltdown on Cairo Island off the coast of Kenya. Because of the fact that neither Stark nor T'Challa could halt the meltdown using their knowledge, Banner had transformed into the Hulk, after which he absorbed the entirety of the nuclear radiation into himself. The result was that with the Cairo nuclear plant producing a prototype form of radiation completely separate from the gamma radiation of the Hulk, Bruce Banner was quite literally turned into a walking nuclear reactor on the verge of exploding and releasing a massive surge of radiation that could have potentially wrecked the world. Now, the reason why Greg Pak is taking this line of thinking is that, as we know, the Hulk persona is constantly angry and thrives on that anger to boost his power. The problem is that as long as the Hulk remains angry, the Kyber and gamma radiation continue to swirl and fluctuate inside of him, teetering even closer to detonation. As a result, and because Amadeus Cho had been such a close friend and fan of the Hulk, the belief of Iron Man and Black Panther was that Amadeus would be able to calm Banner down long enough to allow his body to properly absorb the Kyber radiation and disperse it, or else merge with it and form a new kind of Hulk. To this end, with Cho arriving on the scene and learning of the situation, instead of attempting to communicate with Bruce, he made the decision to spare him of his lifelong struggle and simply absorb the power of the Hulk. Now again, the reason why Pak took this road was that the Hulk persona within Banner is a reflection of his anger and rage at the world, and depending on what stories you read, his past experiences with his abusive father. For Amadeus Cho, however, he has no internal struggle of this kind. Instead, when he absorbed the energy of the Hulk, his mind didn't fracture into a split personality, and instead, Hulk and Amadeus became one and the same. Now, with the rest of Totally Awesome Hulk would really just focus on Amadeus acting the way we all would with power of this magnitude, and that he hits on women, teams up with Miles Morales, and makes jokes about She-Hulk being 40 years old, Greg Pak did not actually provide a conclusion as to what happened to Bruce Banner. Instead, the backstory concluded with Banner apologizing to Amadeus for the decision he'd made and the life he was forced to lead, and that over the course of the next several issues, the Incredible Hulk persona that we were used to seeing in the pre-Secret War stories began to crop up as a reflection in a mirror or simply standing in the background of Amadeus Cho's subconscious mind. Now, where Greg Pak will go with this line of thinking is a question I do not have the answer to, but I would surmise that with Amadeus having absorbed the power of the Hulk, the darker persona present in Bruce simply rests in the mind of Amadeus while he uses the Hulk's powers, and Bruce Banner himself now actually lives as a normal human. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. I know this video was a little finicky, but so is Amadeus Cho. It was really kind of out of thin air. It was really out of left field that he was chosen to be the Incredible Hulk, which again still kind of boggles me a little bit. But the story itself is pretty interesting, and for those of you who have read the Totally Awesome Hulk line so far, post a comment below and let me know what you guys think. And I will catch you all later. Peace.